The desert wind never stopped howling through the cottonwoods behind the ranch. Every night, it seemed to whisper her name, Clara. The cowboy sat by the fire, hat pulled low, whiskey glass untouched, the old wedding ring still hanging from a leather cord around his neck. 5 years had passed since she rode out that storm and never came back. 5 years since the flood took her horse, her laughter, her voice. Folks said he should have moved on, but the prairie had long memories, and so did he. The walls of his cabin still smelled faintly of her lavender soap. Her bonnet still hung by the door, gathering dust, untouched. He worked his ranch alone now, sunrise to sunset, his hands cracked, his heart hollow. He didn't speak much, not even to his neighbors. Sometimes, in the quiet before dawn, he thought he heard her humming from the old bedroom. He'd rise, open the door slow, and find nothing but moonlight across the empty bed. Maybe grief made a man see things that weren't there. Maybe ghosts had their own way of saying goodbye. But that night, the wind carried something else, the faint sound of a horse approaching. He rose from the chair, boots creaking on the floor, hand resting on the revolver at his hip. It wasn't often anyone came by this late. The knock came soft, uncertain. When he opened the door, lantern light fell on a woman standing in the rain, her hair dark, her eyes wide and familiar. For a moment, his breath caught in his chest. She looked just like her. "You're," he started, voice breaking. She nodded. "Evelyn, Clara's sister." He hadn't seen her since the funeral. Back then, she was just a girl in a black dress, trembling as the coffin was lowered into the ground. Now she was older, still carried the same fire in her eyes, but it burned behind something wounded. "I had nowhere else to go," she whispered, shivering. "They burned my place down. Outlaws." He stepped aside without a word and let her in. The cabin filled again with the scent of rain and lilac. She warmed herself by the fire while he poured her coffee, hands shaking slightly. She looked around, saw the photo on the mantel, the one of him and Clara smiling under the cottonwood tree. Her eyes softened. "You still keep her close," she said quietly. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Every plank, every shadow in that cabin already told the story. Later that night, when the storm eased, he went to his room to fetch an extra blanket. But when he pushed the door open, he stopped dead in his tracks. She was there, lying in that bed. Clara's bed. The firelight from the hearth flickered across her face, and for a moment his heart twisted. She looked so much like her sister it hurt to breathe. Her lips parted softly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. There was nowhere else. He swallowed hard, turned his face away. "You shouldn't sleep there," he muttered, his voice low, almost trembling. She looked up at him, her eyes glistening. "Would she mind? I just needed to feel safe." The silence stretched. Outside, the rain began again, tapping against the windows like gentle fingers. He wanted to tell her no. To tell her to take the couch, to leave in the morning. But something inside him, something buried deep and broken, wouldn't let the words come. He stared at the outline of her face in the half-darkness, the way the shadows played tricks on him, the way her breathing filled the empty cabin. And suddenly, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, the ache of being alive again. He stepped back, forcing himself to breathe, and said hoarsely, "Rest. I'll keep watch." He spent the night by the fire, hat tilted low, staring into the flames. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, sometimes Clara's, sometimes Evelyn's, blurring together like ghosts in the smoke. By dawn, the storm had passed, and the first light spilled across the valley, pale and gold. He rose, went to the door, and stood watching the sun rise. Behind him, he heard a soft voice. "She told me about this place," Evelyn said. "She said you'd never leave it. Said it was the only home that ever made her happy." He turned, and for the first time in 5 years, he met someone's eyes without looking away. There was something familiar in her gaze, not just resemblance, but understanding. The kind that came from the same loss, the same pain. "Maybe she was right," he said quietly. "Maybe this place keeps us both." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Then maybe, it's time we stop being ghosts here." The words lingered between them, fragile and dangerous. The morning light moved slowly over the bed, across the ring on the mantel, across the heart of a man who'd forgotten what warmth felt like. And for the first time since the flood, the cabin didn't feel haunted, it felt alive. The sun rose slow over the prairie, spilling gold through the cabin windows, lighting up the dust that hung in the air like ghosts. The cowboy stood outside, coffee steaming in his hand, watching the light crawl across the corral. The air smelled of rain and mud. He hadn't slept at all. Inside, he could still hear Evelyn's slow breathing, steady and soft in the silence. For a moment, it almost felt like it used to, like Clara was still alive and nothing had changed. But that was a lie, and he knew it. Nothing about her being here made sense. When she woke, the morning had already warmed the valley. Her eyes opened to find him staring out the window, lost in thought. "You always rise before the sun?" she asked, stretching, her voice gentle, teasing even. He didn't turn. "Habit," he said. "Work starts early." She watched him, then looked around the cabin. Every piece of it, the tools, the saddle by the door, the photograph on the shelf, told her how much of his heart still belonged to her sister. "You still think about her," she whispered. He turned then, eyes tired, jaw tight. "Every day." She lowered her gaze, fingers brushing the blanket. "I do too," she said softly. "But not just because she's gone." Her words made him freeze. "What do you mean by that?" he asked slowly. Evelyn's lips trembled as she looked up at him. "I mean, she didn't tell you everything before she died." The air seemed to thicken between them. He stepped closer, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "You'd best start explaining." She nodded, tears welling up. "She wrote me letters before the storm. Said she was scared, said someone was after her. I didn't believe her, I thought she was imagining things. But a few days later, they said she drowned. Only, I found one last letter after." She reached into her satchel, trembling, and pulled out a folded piece of yellowed paper. He took it with careful hands, eyes scanning the faded ink. Her handwriting, he'd recognize it anywhere. But the words chilled him. "If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident. Tell him not to trust them." He looked up sharply. "Not to trust who?" Evelyn shook her head. "She never said, only that it was someone close to you. Someone who came around the ranch often." He sank into his chair, the paper shaking in his hand. Memories came rushing back. The men who helped build the fence, the neighbor who offered to buy his land cheap after the storm, the stranger who claimed to have found her horse downstream. He felt something inside him twist. For years, he'd blamed the river. Maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe the storm wasn't what took her. Maybe it was something darker. Evelyn watched him in silence. "I didn't just come here to hide," she said finally. "I came to finish what she started, to find out who killed her." He stared at her, half in disbelief. "You think she was murdered?" Evelyn nodded slowly. "I know she was. The same men who burned my place, they were looking for something. They said her name." He rose suddenly, pacing. "Why come to me then? You could have gone to the law." She met his eyes, fierce and steady. "Because I don't trust the law. Out here, the law listens to whoever has the most land. And that's not us." Her words hit him harder than she knew. For years, he'd been a ghost of himself, letting the ranch fall quiet, letting the world pass him by. But now, standing there in the faint morning light, he felt that old fire stir again, the one that made him fight to survive. By afternoon, they rode out together to the river where Clara's body had been found. The place hadn't changed. The same twisted oak leaned over the water, the same reeds whispered in the breeze. He dismounted slowly, his boots sinking into the wet ground. "Right there," he said quietly, pointing to the bend where the current slowed. "That's where they found her." Evelyn walked ahead, eyes scanning the bank. "You said her horse was found downstream." He nodded. "Broken reins, like she was thrown." She knelt by the mud, running her hand through it. Her fingers brushed something, a glint of metal half buried beneath the surface. She dug it out carefully and gasped. It was a locket, rusted, but still recognizable. She opened it with trembling fingers, revealing two small photos, one of Clara, one of him. "She wore this every day," he said, voice cracking. "I thought it was lost." Evelyn looked up at him. "Then someone wanted it found now." He frowned. "What do you mean?" She rose, eyes narrowing. "Someone wants us to know she didn't drown here." Her voice was calm but steady with purpose. "This isn't where she died." The cowboy stared at her, the wind catching his coat, the river whispering in the silence. "Then where?" he asked. Evelyn looked toward the hills beyond the valley, where the sun was starting to fall. "Where it all began," she said softly. "At your old barn." For the first time in 5 years, the cowboy's heart beat not from sorrow, but from something else, the need for truth. The ghost of his wife was no longer just memory. She was calling him toward something buried deeper than grief, something waiting to be unearthed under the dust of the past. And beside him stood her sister, the only person who might help him find it, or destroy him trying.